Good afternoon. My name is Frank Rohde, and I work in housing. Before I start, I want to give a shout out to my 6-year-old twins, Anya and Johannes. They helped me build this house, and I asked them, can you build a house brick by brick? So this is what they come up with. Their little figures are in there. This is a question that I think everyone has asked or heard about or read about. And if you look at the struggle today of first-time homebuyers, in particular the missing middle, it is the worst environment that young people are living through in over 75 years. So I want to take you on a little journey, first to understand what are the underlying reasons, second to explore why is this important and why should we care about solving it, and then lastly present a very simple yet also hard idea on how we can solve it. Now, you may ask yourself, this is brick and mortar. This is the definition of brick and mortar, and you're at a conference about the Renaissance and how AI can help. And not to steal the punchline, but there is a way in which AI can help us think through housing in a different way. So let me take you on that journey. There's a number of reasons, and the first one is probably the easiest one to understand, which is the price of the average starter home, the median home in the US, has gone up consistently over the last 50 years. Nationwide, we're at about 4.5 times median home price to median income. That's up from about 2x in the 1970s. And where we are today, anyone want to venture a guess what the ratio of the median home in Palo Alto to the median income is? Yeah, more than that. It is 19x, right? Think about that, 19x. The average person living here cannot not afford to buy a home. So not only is it home prices, and the reason home prices are so high is that we just don't have enough of them, right? And it's a local question, it's a state question, it's a supply question. The second reason is that mortgage rates are higher than they were in the last 10, 15 years. Now, you may all say, well, mortgage rates are disproportionately high. That's what it feels like. They're not. They are where they were always, in the mid-6s, mid-7s. Mortgage rates are at their long-run average. They're not going to come back down to the 2s and 3s that a lot of us are probably lucky to have seen over the last 10, 15 years. And so what that does is not only are home prices high, the affordability, the monthly payment, if you wanted to buy a home, is disproportionately high. It's back to where it was over the last 50, 60 years. So you have home prices. And then for the longest time, until about 5, 6 years ago, we had this massive wealth transfer in the form of mortgage interest tax deduction, which was about $30 billion a year that the federal government was transferring to homeowners by virtue of you being able to deduct your mortgage interest from your income taxes. Now, if you're a first-time buyer and you make a reasonable income and you buy a $400,000, $500,000 home, which is a starter home today, not here, but in most parts of the US, you're not itemizing your taxes, so you're not getting that benefit. And so that deduction, that wealth transfer, that support is gone. Now, you have student debt as kind of the fourth big weight on first-time home buyers. The average college graduate graduates with about $55,000 in student debt, and that's debt that needs to be paid down before you can stack a mortgage on top of it. So you've got all of these things coming together, and a first-time buyer going out then also competes with Wall Street. A quarter of all homes in the US are being bought by private equity real estate funds. And they're buying them and they're turning them into rentals. Right? That's good business for them, but it makes ownership even harder. So all of these things are coming together for the first time in over 75 years. And if you look at the statistics of what that's causing, today, in some of the markets that we're active in, the win rate for a first-time home buyer trying to buy a starter home is 1 in 50, 2%. That's down from 15, 20% a couple of years ago. Last year, the average age of a first-time home buyer was 38. That's up from 29 about 15 years ago. So what are people doing? They're staying with their parents, they're renting longer, they're delaying that kind of graduation into owning their own home. And you could say, well, so what? What if we turn into a nation of renters? That's a big problem, and I'll tell you a little bit about why. So the win rate keeps decreasing, the average age keeps increasing, but there are some people who can afford to buy homes. Last year, 50% of first-time buyers had help from their families. Now, who are those folks? They kind of look like this, right? They come from wealth backgrounds. They have parents or uncles or aunts who can help them. That's great for them. What about the other half, right? And this is a problem that disproportionately impacts people at the bottom of the economic pyramid, people from low wealth backgrounds, minorities, recent immigrants. So it's a pernicious and regressive problem that we're looking to solve. And it's a large problem, right? We have about 1 million people per year over the next 10 years moving through their first-time home buying years. Millennials, Gen Z behind them. So why is this important? Why do we care? Why do I care? Well, I care because I spent 15 years running a company that helped big banks make more money pricing mortgages. So I was in the bowels of mortgage math, which is a fascinating area to spend your career in, and started seeing this problem. Started seeing it in the data, started seeing it when talking to customers, and asked the question, well, what are you doing about it, executive in big bank A, big bank B, mortgage lender C? And the answer was, well, we can't really do anything about it because it's the government's choice to design and define the mortgages that we sell, right? And unless you can help government-sponsored entities innovate, it's very, very hard to solve this problem. So we set out and started a company to look at how do we help solve this problem. Now, why should we all care? Homeownership is the single largest contribution and store of wealth for the average American. And I'm not talking about generational wealth. I'm talking about the nest egg of the average American, their retirement. It's largely driven by the increase in equity that exists in their single-family home. And that's great for those people who can make the leap. It also contributes to educational attainment. In this country, we've decided to fund schools through property taxes, which basically means that schools in markets and in neighborhoods where you have home values and owner-occupied homes have better educational attainment. Now, whether that's the right or wrong system, we can all debate, but that's what it is. So homeownership actually increases educational attainment. It increases civic engagement, and it ultimately leads to a deeply personal sense of achievement, right? It's part of the American dream. As I mentioned, there are about 1 million people per year working through this age group, which means it's a problem worth trying to solve, worth focusing on. Now, how can we solve this problem? One of the key questions that we were trying to answer is, why is it a binary choice between buying and renting? So the journey on the left, the purchase, the buying a home, today, nationwide is about 40% more expensive than the rental journey. Again, in the Bay Area, it's about 150% more expensive, and you all feel that. So why isn't there a path in the middle? It's a simple question. And if you ask that question, the question you're really asking is, well, why do I have to buy 100% of a home? Why can't I buy half of it, or a quarter of it, a fraction of it? Why can't I own a quarter of a home? It's a simple question. And if I could own a quarter or half or even 10% and rent the rest, right, between those two journeys, I could create a middle path and make it more affordable, more attainable for the average American. So why can't you own a fraction of a home? Well, it goes all the way back to the settlers and how we own property in the US today. The way you own property is by filing a deed, a title with the county. That roughly looks like that, right? You stand in line, you file a piece of paper. In most counties, there's a little tiny county courthouse, and there's a back room. It's the registrar's office, and there's rolls and files and drawers, and that's where the title is filed. So if you go to a county and say, well, I want to own this home together with David, right, and every month we want to change fractions, and I'm going to pay him a little bit of rent, and then he sells me more of it, and that doesn't work. The county doesn't do that, right? And there's 3,000 counties. So the question that we were trying to answer was, is there another mechanism in which we can fractionalize homes and create this notion of a fractional ownership? This simple idea of a brick, right? Could you own a brick in a home? A share, just like you own a share of Apple, right? Could you own a share in a home? Well, and if you could, then you could buy it, you could rent it, you could sell it, you could trade it, right? And you'd have to solve a couple of problems along the way, but it sounds like a good idea on the surface. So as we dug in, it turns out it's really hard to do, We'll get to how to solve it. But if we could do this, now what we can do around this construct of bricks is we can partner investors with homebuyers. We can create shared ownership and lower the cost for the homebuyer. We could partner families with their children, right, their nieces, nephews. We could partner employers with their employees, capital sources with first-time homebuyers. Not through debt, but through this notion of shared ownership, fractional ownership in a property. So, how we do this is we start companies and have companies hold title to a home. And that gets you around the problem of the county courthouse and filing a deed and, the ownership, the realization, the bona fide ownership structure of a home. Now, what's the problem with starting a company? It's a bunch of work. It's a bunch of paperwork, right? You have to go to Delaware Chancery Court and file it and do all of that. So this is where I comes in, right? This is where technology can help us solve this in a meaningful way. So we start companies. We have each company issue 10,000 shares or bricks, and that creates ownership interest, bona fide ownership interests in individual pieces of property, starter homes. Now, there are 3 problems that were hard to solve. The first one was if you issue shares in a home and that home goes up in value, you have to revalue the shares. Home goes down in value, you have to revalue the shares. So shares have to float, right? Break value has to be established every month. Can we use technology to solve that? The second big question was the one I just mentioned. Well, if you have to start a company and file all the paperwork and, create annual reports and do all of that work, including all the tax returns, that's a bunch of work just to own a single-family home. Can we solve that? And then lastly, can we explain all of this to consumers and realtors and lawyers and everyone involved in the purchase process? And that's really where AI and technology over the last 2 years has allowed us to jump significantly in our ability to solve these problems. So this is an example of a home that has been on the market with bricks jointly owned between investors and first-time homebuyers in Raleigh-Durham. And what you see here is the floating value of that share price or the brick price. And every month, the folks living in the home are buying slightly more from investors holding those shares. The investors are earning rental income. The folks living in the home are increasing their ownership, and eventually they're taking it over completely. The average cost to start a company, have title vested in that company, file it with the state, is now down to less than $1,000 a year from $7,500 when we started. That's one of the big, in a way, simple brick and mortar idea, but enabled by the ability to do all of that overhead, all of that paperwork in an automated fashion. And then lastly, we're using technology to explain all of this to consumers who have a lot of questions, right? Because we've been owning property the same way for 70, 80 years. Now we're proposing a new way here that obviously raises a lot of questions. So, in a nutshell, what we're doing and what we're proposing here is turning homes into affordable shares, bricks, that can be owned and bought over time by first-time homebuyers, funded by sources of capital, and by doing that, we can reduce the cost of entry by between 20 to 30% on the down payment, on the monthly payment, and create a more affordable path to ownership. And what we've done so far is we've been able to partner sources of capital, individual investors, family offices, institutional money, philanthropic, donor-advised funds, and first-time homebuyers to create those partnerships in individual homes. So to answer the question, how do we help first-time homebuyers, the missing middle young people, buy their next home, their first home? It's brick by brick. Thank you very much.